guys. I brought a guest. Good afternoon. First off at the top, I want to acknowledge that there's been an additional wave of threats to Jewish community centers and Anti-Defamation League offices. According to some reports, there have been over 100 bomb threats phoned into Jewish institutions since the start of this year alone. As the president said at the beginning of his joint address, quote, "We're a country that stands united in condemning hate and evil in all of its forms. We denounce these latest anti-Semitic and hateful threats in the strongest terms. It is incredibly saddening that I have to continue to share these disturbing reports with you, and I share the president's thoughts that he fervently hopes that we don't continue to have to share these reports with you. But as long as they do continue, we'll continue to condemn them and look at ways in which we can stop them. Now on to news of the day. You saw President Trump yesterday continue to deliver on two of his most significant campaign promises, protecting the country against radical Islamic terrorism and repealing and replacing Obamacare with a patient-centric alternative. We talked a lot about the executive order protecting the nation from foreign terrorist entry into the United States yesterday. And so on to Obamacare. I'd like to introduce the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Dr. Tom Price, to come up and talk to you a little bit about the plan to repeal and replace Obamacare. Dr. Price.
Thanks, Sean. Good afternoon. First, let me just share with you what an honor it is to serve as the Secretary of Health and Human Services. I'm the third physician out of 23 individuals who've had the privilege of serving as the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And the mission at our department is to improve the health and safety and well-being of the American people. And we take that mission very, very seriously. And for many Americans right now, their ability to gain health care or health coverage is a real challenge. For most Americans, they receive their health coverage through their employer. It's about 175 million folks. Those individuals will see no significant change other than there won't be a penalty for not purchasing coverage. For the folks in the Medicare system, there will be no changes at all in the current law. But we're talking about those people in the individual and small group market, the moms and pops, the folks who run the corner grocery store, the corner cleaners. Those individuals out there are having huge challenges gaining care and gaining coverage. And then Medicaid is a program that by and large has decreased the ability for folks to gain access to care, and we want to make certain that we address that. This is about patients. This is not about money. This is not about something else. This is about patients. And sadly, the costs are going up for those folks in the individual and small group market. The access is going down, and it's only getting worse. You know the stories. Premiums increased 25% over the last year on average. Arizona had an increase of 116%. Deductibles are going up for many, many folks. If you're a mom or a dad out there and you make $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, your deductible in this market, in that individual and small group market, oftentimes is $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 a year. What that means is that you've got an insurance card, but you don't get care because you can't afford the deductible. And we know that this is happening by talking to the folks who are out there trying to provide the care. A third of the counties in the United States, 1/3 of the counties in the United States have only one insurer offering coverage on the exchange. 5 states only have one insurer offering coverage on the exchange. One insurer is not a choice. So we need to make certain that we correct that. In Tennessee this morning, it was announced that there are a number of counties that have no insurer offering coverage on the exchange. Insurers are leaving the market on the exchange. Last year, there were 232 insurers that were providing coverage, that were offering coverage on the exchange. Now there are 167. That's a loss of about 30% in 1 year alone. And all of this means that patients are not getting the care that they need. Now, the principles that we have as our guiding star are affordability. We want a system that's affordable for everybody. Accessibility. We need a system that's accessible for everybody, a system that's of the highest quality, a system that incentivizes innovation in the healthcare system, and a system that empowers patients through both transparency and accountability. The President spoke last Tuesday, to a joint session of Congress, and he laid out his principles. First, wanted to make certain that those with pre-existing illness and injury were not priced out of the market. Nobody ought to lose their coverage because they get a bad diagnosis. In terms of affordability, health savings accounts, growing choices for patients is incredibly important. Tax credits that allow individuals to be able to purchase the kind of coverage that they want, not that the government forces them to buy. We've always talked about, in terms of what kinds of reforms need to be put in place, that we need to equalize the tax treatment for the purchase of coverage. Those, again, in the employer-sponsored market, they get a tax benefit for buying health coverage. Those folks that are out there in the individual and small group market, no tax benefit. And that's what this plan would do. State flexibility. It's incredibly important that we allow the states to be the ones that are defining what health coverage is, have the flexibility, especially in the Medicaid program, to be able to respond to their vulnerable population. Lawsuit abuse, the President mentioned, and it's incredibly important. The practice of defensive medicine wastes billions and billions of dollars every single year, and we need to make certain that we're addressing that as well. The President also talked about a glide path, an appropriate transition to this new phase for health care for our country, and that's important as well, so that nobody falls through the cracks. Buying across state lines, buying insurance across state lines. The President talked about this on the campaign over and over. American people understand the common sense nature of purchasing across state lines, and it increases competition, and we need to make certain that that happens, and then addressing the incredible increase in drug prices. There are three phases of this plan. One is the bill that was introduced last evening in the House of Representatives. That's the start of all of this. Second are all the regulatory modifications and changes that can be put into place. As you all well know, the previous administration used regulations to a fare thee well. In fact, there were 192 specific rules that were put out as they relate to Obamacare, over 5,000 letters of guidance and the like. And we are going to go through every single one of those and make certain that if they help patients, then we need to continue them. If they harm patients or increase costs, then obviously they need to be addressed. And then there's other legislation that will need to be addressed that can't be done through the reconciliation process. So the goal of all of this is patient-centered health care, where patients and families and doctors are making medical decisions and not the federal government. We commend the House for the introduction of the bill yesterday, and we look forward to working with all individuals in this process. And I look forward to a few questions. Yes, sir.
Secretary, you're familiar from your time in the House with the clout that conservative groups like the Club for Growth and Heritage Action have with rank-and-file members. What does it say about this legislation that these groups are already out with opposition to it?
Well, I think that this is the beginning of the process, and we look forward to working with them and others to make certain that, again, we come up with that process that aligns with the principles that we've defined, that they actually adhere to or agree with as well, and that is that we need a system that's affordable for folks, a system that's accessible for individuals, that's of the highest quality, that incentivizes innovation, and that empowers patients. And so we look forward to working with them through this process.
Secretary, Congressman Chaffetz said today that Americans may have to forego a new iPhone to pay for health care, and they'll have to kind of make these choices. Does the administration agree with that? Will Americans under this plan, will they need to maybe sacrifice other goods to pay for their health care?
This is an important question because what's happening right now is that the American people are having to sacrifice in order to purchase coverage. And as I mentioned, many individuals can't afford the kind of coverage that they have right now. So they've got that insurance card, but they don't have care. What our desire is to drive down the health care costs for everybody. And the way that you do that is to increase choices for folks, increase competition, return the regulation of health care where it ought to be, which is at the state level, not at the federal level. All of these things that taken in their aggregate will in fact decrease the cost of health care and health coverage, and that will allow folks to be able to purchase the coverage that they want. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Price. I have two questions for you. The first has to do with guarantees that you can make as the administration's point person on this legislation. Can you guarantee that whatever legislation emerges and makes it to the president's desk will allow individuals, if they like their doctor, they can keep their doctor? And the second guarantee is, can you also guarantee that health care premiums for individuals will come down with this new legislation?
Again, a remarkably important question because, as you'll recall, the promise from the last administration was if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. If you like your plan, you can keep your plan. Both of those promises turned out to be not true. We think it's incredibly important for the American people to be able to select the physician and the place where they're treated themselves, that the government ought not be involved in that process. And so our goal is to absolutely to make certain that individuals have the opportunity to select their physician. In terms of premiums, we believe strongly that through this whole process and as it takes effect, that we'll see a decrease in not only the premiums that individuals will see, but a decrease in the cost of health care for folks. Remember that was another promise that the previous administration made, that you'd see a decrease in $2,500 on average for families across this land. In fact, what they've seen is an increase of $2,500 or $3,000. So we're going to go in the other direction. We're going to go in a direction that empowers patients and holds down costs.
Mr. Secretary, you are quite a distance away from conservatives with this plan in the central part of it, which is tax credits, which they see as yet another entitlement, very similar to the entitlement of Obamacare, they're different in form. How do you convince them, since it's going to take tax credits to make this work, that they need to swallow this and move forward with the bill? I mean, you're getting an awful lot of opposition on this central tenet of this whole thing.
Remember, this is all about patients. And in order to provide that transition and in order to make it so that nobody falls through the cracks, we've got to have a system that allows for individuals to gain the kind of coverage that they want. And we, conservatives and others, have said for a long, long time that we believe it's important to equalize the tax treatment for those purchasing coverage, gaining coverage through their employer, and those not. And the tax credit is the opportunity to be able to equalize that tax treatment. Folks have talked about this for many years, actually, so that there's not a distortion in the tax code for who's able to gain a benefit for being able to purchase coverage and not. Yes, ma'am.
Sir, Mr. Secretary, you were talking about making sure people don't fall through the cracks. The last administration with Obamacare focused in on making sure the underserved were part of the equation. What is the safety net or the safeguard that you have to make sure, to ensure people don't fall through the cracks beyond the tax incentives, but also for the underserved, who are now many are now part of the program that weren't before prior to Obamacare?
This is extremely important as well, and the current system, as you likely know, for those vulnerable in our population, especially in the Medicaid population, this is a system that's broken. You've got a third of the physicians in this country, 1/3 of the doctors in this country that would be eligible to see Medicaid patients who aren't seeing Medicaid patients right now. And it's not because they've forgotten how to take care of patients. It's because of the rules that are in place that make it too onerous or too difficult for them to see Medicaid patients. So we believe that it's important to allow states to have that flexibility to fashion the program for their vulnerable population that actually responds to that population in a way that gives them the authority, them the choices, them the opportunity to gain coverage and the care that they believe most appropriate.
Find out that is not happening when you give it to the states. Is there some type of punishment or some type of piece that you're going to put in place to make sure that happens, that they follow through on your intent?
Yeah, there's absolutely. There's accountability throughout the plan that we have that would allow for the Secretary and the Department to be certain that the individuals that we believe need to be cared for are being cared for in the state at the appropriate level. But we believe this is a partnership. This is about patience and partnership. The previous administration tended to make it about government. We believe it's about patience and partnership, and we want to partner with every single person in this land who wants to make certain that we allow the kind of choices and quality to exist. Yes, ma'am.
The President tweeted earlier today, he described this bill as our wonderful new health care bill. There's been a little bit of confusion. Does this represent the administration's bill, and is there anything in this bill that the administration cannot support?
This has been a work in progress. As you know, this has been going on for over a year. The work that I had the privilege of participating in when I served in the House of Representatives in the last Congress was open and transparent, and we invited folks in to give their ideas, and tens, if not hundreds of people had input into that process. This grew out of that, and over the past number of weeks, we've been having conversations with folks on the Hill, in the House and in the Senate, and other stakeholders. And so this is a work product that is a result of all of that process. The President and the administration support this step in the right, what we believe is in the right direction, a step that repeals Obamacare and gets us moving in the direction of those principles that I outlined.
Do you support everything
Yeah.
that's in that bill that's sitting on the table, sir? Do you support everything that's in the bill sitting on the table, sir?
Well, this is a work in progress, and we'll work with the House and the Senate in this process. As you know, it's a legislative process that occurs. I'm glad you pointed out the bills on the table there. As you'll see, this bill right here was the bill that was introduced in 2009 and 10 by the previous administration. Notice how thick that is. Some of you will recall that I actually turned the pages and went through that piece of legislation in a YouTube. The bill on the pile on the right is the current bill, and what it means is that we are making certain that the process, that the decisions that are going to be made are not going to be made by the federal government. They're going to be made by patients and families and doctors. One last.
Secretary, given the opposition that John and others have brought up here today, does this plan already need to be salvaged in your view, and how do you do it?
Oh no! You know what happens with these things. You start at a starting point. People engage and they get involved in the process. Sometimes to a greater degree. Nothing focuses the mind like a bill that's currently on the table and that has a work in progress or in process. And we'll work through it. This is an important process to be had. The American people have said to their elected leaders that the Obamacare process for them gaining coverage and care is not working. That's what they've said. And so we believe it's important to respond to the American people and provide a health care system that allows for them to purchase the kind of coverage and care that they desire. Yeah.
You said in your letter to the House Chairman that necessary technical and appropriate changes might need to be made for this bill to reach the President's desk. So what specific changes is the White House and the administration looking for in this bill?
Well, as I mentioned, there are three different phases to this process. One is this bill, this legislation that's working through under the rules of reconciliation, which is a fancy term to mean that there are only certain things that you can do from a budgetary standpoint has to affect either spending or revenue. There are things that you can't do in this bill, and those we plan on doing across the horizon in Phase 2, which is the regulatory portion, and then in Phase 3, which is another piece of legislation that would be going through the House and the Senate with a majority, supermajority in the Senate. That process will incorporate all of the kinds of things that we believe are absolutely necessary to reconstitute that individual and small group market and to get us in a position again where patients and families and docs are making these decisions.
Secretary, bearing in mind that the CBO score isn't yet, can you guarantee that this plan will not have a markedly negative impact on the deficit or result in millions of Americans losing health insurance?
What I can say is that the goal and the desire, I know, of the individuals on the Hill is to make certain that this does not increase the cost to the federal government.
Two elements of the bill